My name's Joy Redstone, and this show is called Irreparable/Infinite. So the inspiration for this show is about trauma recovery and healing. I've had a lot of experiences in my life that people legitimately would consider traumatic, but they've also been vehicles for growth, shown me a pathway of healing, and deepened my spirituality. And so the way the show is organized is around a couple key traumatic events in my life, but with the bulk of the pieces being pieces to me that are about recovery and healing and spirituality. Ultimately, when trauma happens to a person, for most people, there is a question why. Why might this happen to me? And there's a big cultural thing that we experience, which is this idea that bad things don't happen to good people. But in fact, bad things or death or loss or pain or suffering, that is part of everyone's life. And if you say yes to the deepening and the learning that trauma can provide, you can learn to set aside that question why and lean into acceptance and peace and the solace that one can find inside of oneself. And for me, the process of making art is where I find solace, where I find healing, and where I find peace. So this part of the show is called Journey to Motherhood. And like many women, I automatically assumed that I was going to be able to have children when I wanted to. In my early 30s, I embarked really in a carefree way on trying to get pregnant. And the first thing that happened was that I experienced a miscarriage. So this piece is about that experience and is called Grace's Passing. In my mind, even though I was only pregnant a brief time, I loved that child. And I wanted her more than I could possibly even explain in words. And so I was really bereft when I went through that experience. So this piece is talking about how I felt at that time. And I wanted to honor her. For me, she was as much a being as anyone that actually gets to be born. And then what happened after that was I was not able to get pregnant for many years. So this piece is called Ghost Uterus and is about the experience of infertility. As the years wore on, I went through all kinds of infertility treatment, IVF, and I wasn't very kind to myself at that time. That was more than 20 years ago, and I did not know as much about loving myself and taking care of myself. So I used to call myself, internally and externally, a withered, barren husk. And so this piece is meant to represent the womb. This is meant to represent like her fertility, and this section and the skull are about the emptiness and loss that I was experiencing at that time. I'm happy to say that eventually I did become pregnant. Ironically, and as happens with many other people, after I decided it's okay. I'm moving past this in my life. I've accepted this and it's okay. I miraculously got pregnant, and this piece is called Quickening, and it is about, there are little symbols in here that represent my children, a spiny shell for my spiny, pokey daughter, and a little cute sea urchin for my much easier son. But although there is, pain around this and different symbols that represent the body, to me, I focus on this part of it, which to me was like I was walking on air. I was so happy. I just can't even, I don't know if I have the words to tell you what it was like to finally have this dream come true in my life. All right, this section for me is about relationships. I called it the lovers. It's really lovers and husbands. Like a lot of people with trauma, I did not have the best relationship skills and tended to choose partners that replicated things I grew up with. So these pieces represent men that were in my life that were difficult. Thus, this piece represents someone I was with for a few years who was really empty and dead inside. No naming names, you know. This piece is also about that particular person. We were together for a long time, and I experienced that dynamic where I both felt too much and not enough. And for me, this piece is about him being pretty dead inside and me just trying to surround him with love and beauty and art, and just none of that being able to penetrate. These two pieces were about a man that I married, my last husband, who sadly took his life just about 9 years ago in May. This piece, he had a very, very painful, agonizing illness that affected his spine. So this piece is about his illness, his soul. To me, this is a symbol that represents the soul, that childlike, beautiful, innocent part of himself that still remained despite all of his difficulties. And after he passed, I did this piece to honor him. For me, he was this conflicted, contradictory, suffering person, yet he was also beautiful in his heart of hearts. So I tried to choose colors and shapes that represented conflict and contrast. One more on this, and then we'll move on to slightly happier topics. This was a more recent experience where sadly the person was really, just profoundly truth challenged. So this one is called Lies and Shadows, and is about just the machinations of lies that go on for people when they're really scared to be present. Yet there was a lot of beauty, and I believe there to be something sacred in everyone. So there are other symbols in this for me that represent still that sacred part that yearns for connection and yearns for communion, even if a person really has trouble telling the truth. Now we'll move to another section which talks about my children. I was going to be the best mother ever, right? Really fought hard to have kids, and it was my dream to be a mother. And yet, given some of the ways I grew up, I had a way of mothering that was basically, well, do the opposite of what my parents did. And that worked for a while until my children reach adolescence. And then there is, I think, a price to be paid by kids when their mom struggles with trauma. And I've, spent my life recovering from trauma, and yet have to be real with the fact that I've communicated some of that to my children. So these pieces are about my children's struggle with addiction and self-harm. I think I don't want to say a whole lot more about that, given that those are their stories, but seeing my children struggle in those ways was challenging and hard and sad, and the opposite of what I thought I was going to be able to provide for them. And as I mentioned, art is the way that I let things pass through and gain healing and solace. So maybe we'll just leave this section and move to the part that's about spirituality. So, thank you for bearing with the trauma tour. Now we're starting into the part that for me is about healing and recovery and spirituality. So we'll just move through this wall. This piece is called 100 miles per hour towards the light. And that represents for me, hey, I didn't really get healthy until I was an older person, right? And now that I feel healthy and happy and at peace and at home in my body, I am hell-bent for happiness and reaching the light. And so this piece is kind of a self-reflection about I am just pointed towards what's good and healthy with all my might. And that's pretty simple. That's basically that one. This one is called Let Loss Be Your Guide. And so here, my basic thought is that we all experience loss. And it is hard when you lose someone, when someone dies, when you suffer a deep disappointment. It is one of the most humbling experiences that one can have. Yet, it also orients you towards what's important in your life. When you go through a big loss, you realize the people and experiences that are meaningful to you. And if you allow yourself to be guided by that, sorrow and loss and suffering open up an equal capacity for love and happiness. So although some of the symbolism in this piece is dark, to me, it's about almost like holding a handful of stars in your hand and really seeing that and really letting that guide you towards your own health and happiness. This piece, maybe a little sadder. This piece is called Crossroads. I have a younger sister who sadly is in her dying process from cancer right now. And as I reflect on that, I feel both happy that her suffering will be over soon, and I recognize that she is this crossroads between life and death, between fear and pain and release. So this piece is centered around mica in the middle, which might be a little hard to see, and that to me represents going towards the next experience, the afterlife, whatever you might like to call it. I realize that might not fit everybody's definition of spirituality or happiness, but this is how I have found peace with her passing. This next piece is called The Altar, and it is about loving nature, finding peace in nature, finding how the beauty of nature sustains us, and how, I don't go to church, but literally every time I go outside and I let myself be in nature, I feel connected and real and whole and present. And so this piece is just a giant thank you to nature, basically. And that kind of takes us to this next one called The Opening, which I'm going to get the tag up there in a second. Also a piece about nature, but a piece about love. How I feel really blessed to have a happy, healthy, stable partnership in my life with someone whom I love and really loves me. I made this piece for him, and it's about being willing to open, being willing to chance, being willing to trust, being willing to love, even when it's always a risk. That's why it's an opening. So this is actually one of my favorite pieces because it just represents pure happiness to me. So just two more. These are kind of similar. This is called Open the Door. And it's about going inside and opening the doors inside to spirit and love and health. So very simple. Grab that doorknob, turn that door, open the door and go through it, and find what's on the other side of your fear and pain. And one final, this piece is called Within, and is about learning to meditate and to go within. So this is all about this pathway, which is both beautiful and painful. So there's lots of symbols of light, and also broken glass and nails and so forth, because that pathway in is not always easy. Yet ultimately, there are no answers to be found outside of ourselves. There are only answers to be found within ourselves when we confront these kinds of existential questions of meaning and suffering. So it's really important to me to speak about the things that have occurred to me, not only because that brings meaning to me, but because that reduces shame and stigma for other people. So I want to read a couple of sentences from my artist statement. Trauma lies. Trauma tells us that we are alone. Trauma tells that we should not speak it, and that if we do, we will not be believed. The truth is that the fragments become whole. The darkness fades to light. Claim your victory. Sing your song. If you can bring love to any part of yourself, you have made the irreparable an alchemy instead of a destruction.